Welcome to the ABC Election Centre, where tonight votes from across the country will soon be flowing in to determine the next government of Australia. Booths right down eastern Australia closed literally just minutes ago. The count is on, and I imagine a lot of you will be saying, thank God for that. Whatever else you might say about this election, you could hardly describe it as one that has inspired the public's imagination. But this is still democracy in action, and after 3 sometimes agonising years of minority government and effectively a 7-month election campaign, we're likely to see the coalition led by Tony Abbott swept into office tonight. In fact, Labor's primary vote threatens to collapse to its lowest level in post-war politics, possibly back to the 30s. Kevin Rudd got away to a promising start after his re-election as Labor Prime Minister 2 months ago, but it's been all downhill since the formal campaign began, with the polls now suggesting a wholesale slaughter for Labor in New South Wales and big problems in Queensland and elsewhere. Joining me now are 2 of the country's sharpest political minds. Stephen Smith is retiring at this election, one of 7 Kevin Rudd ministers and Julia Gillard ministers to resign at this election, after serving as Foreign Minister and Defence Minister under both Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. Senator Arthur Sinodinos is a veteran of John Howard's office, where he was his closest advisor, and is now close to Tony Abbott as his shadow parliamentary secretary. Also with us tonight, the ABC's chief political writer, Annabelle Crabb, and of course, veteran ABC election analyst Anthony Green. I can honestly say he's one of a kind. Anthony, what are we looking for primarily tonight in the early stages?
Well, look, this is a government which has been in minority for 3 years. So what we're looking for is any swing against the government. And of course, the polls are indicating more than that. If we bring up the existing chamber that was elected at the last election, what we see, there's the chamber, the current position, this is the results from last time, 72 Labor, 73 Coalition, 1 Green, 4 others. What's happened since then is that one of those seats, Craig Thompson, has left the Labor Party, and Peter Slipper has left the LNP. So they're both there down 1, but we've left them with the original parties. And there's 2 members retiring, Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor. Those seats will be won by the Coalition. So the starting position tonight, Kerry, the Coalition is on 75 seats for us, 72 for Labor. The Coalition need only 1 more seat. The Labor Party needs 4, and all the polls are indicating, and the polls in each of the state are indicating, Labor is going to lose seats, not gain them.
Stephen Smith, have you brought your brave face tonight?
Well, I'm off the back of a Dockers victory, so I suspect it'll be the case that one of my teams will win today, but the government will be defeated tonight. That's the reality. Andrew's taking you through the minority parliament. We started this campaign behind in seats when you allocated the independents and the Green to notional major party columns. It's 74 Labor, 76 the Coalition, so we had to win seats. We started off behind in the polls, and there hasn't been a poll other than in my own seat of Federal Perth where we've been ahead. So pessimistically, I'm looking at a result which will be a 1996 type result, a heavy defeat for the government, but it could get worse than that and end up somewhere between 1996 and 1975 or 77.
Stephen, I've covered quite a number of elections with you. I've never heard you this pessimistic and this clear-cut at the beginning of a night.
Well, I think all of the evidence is clear-cut. If you run a line through the major national opinion polls, the respected opinion polls, they're all running now, as they have been since the inception of the campaign, anywhere between 53-47 against Labor to 54-46 against Labor. So in my mind, the question is, where will the loss of seats stem? This will, despite our difficult circumstances, will still be a night, I think, where incumbency will help. So there'll be a point in the night where we get to the cusp of seats which are falling and which are being held. Incumbency will help. So, for example, incumbency will help Treasurer Bowen in his area. And also we'll see some regional variation. So you might find a big swing in Western Sydney, but you might find that Mike Kelly and Eden Monero and Janelle Saffin in Page hang on against the tide. So there'll be those usual variations, but this is a night where, regrettably, from my perspective, we'll see the defeat of a Labor government and the need for Labor to start again with its next generation.
Arthur Sinodinos, when Labor did bite the bullet and replace Julia Gillard with Kevin Rudd, how genuinely concerned were senior Liberals inside the system?
Oh,
Whatever
look,
you were saying publicly, how concerned were you privately?
I think people were concerned because it was clear under Julia that people had stopped listening, and you could imagine political hardheads saying, well, we've got to do something about it, even though they were conscious of the issue of repeating 2010. Within the coalition there was concern, because when we looked at all the contenders who could take over for the Labor Party, Kevin Rudd had the best story to tell. He'd be the resurrected Prime Minister, done in by his own side, and at that stage at least, the view was that this is quite a formidable campaigner. So let him loose close to an election, when perhaps he doesn't have to have the same scrutiny as you have over an extended period. It could be quite strong. And he did start strongly. There's no doubt about it.
Were you surprised at how quickly his support dissipated?
I was. I think what kicked in was probably the fact that Abbott did not lose his cool. He sort of kept with the same strategy, kept with the same major messages. And then what happened over a little time is that people started to remember the old Kevin, and from time to time something would happen that might remind them of that. But I think the fundamental problem was he didn't really change the message that much. And so this is probably a verdict, not so much on Rudd Gillard personally. I think it's a verdict on 6 years where there's been division and there's been disunity. And whatever achievements the government's got to its credit have been overshadowed by this perception in the community of great division and dysfunction. And Kevin was not able to be the circuit breaker and change. He really wanted to go back to 2007, almost wipe the last. The biggest problem Labor have had is in 2010, Julia Gillard could not run on Kevin Rudd's record, particularly around the GFC. And in 2013, Kevin couldn't claim all of the things that Julia had done.
Just very quickly, Annabelle, you've been following the campaign closely. If there was one sort of overwhelming aspect of this that stood out to you that tells the story, what was it?
I think it was the fact that the Prime Minister constantly had to resort to the past or talk about the past when he was actually really trying quite hard to talk about the future. I think that the idea of changing leaders at this late stage was to find a release valve for what Labor hoped was a community keenness to get rid of Labor and a lack of real interest in Tony Abbott. Kevin Rudd was going to be that release valve, but it doesn't really seem to have come through.
Indeed. Two of the most marginal seats in the country, the Labor-held seat of Corangamite in regional Victoria and the Liberal seat of Brisbane, are perhaps the canaries in the coal mine tonight. And the poor old voters of both seats have been subjected to a barrage of attention for months. Sarah Henderson is contesting Corangamite for the Liberal Party, and Fiona McNamara is Labor's candidate for Brisbane, and they're talking with Annabelle Crabb.
Thanks very much for joining us here tonight, and I know it's very hard at this early stage in the evening when candidate nerves are at their very worst. But first to you, Fiona, you must have been on an incredible roller coaster over the last 9 weeks or so.
Well, I have to say it's been the experience of my lifetime. I'm very fortunate to have been a Labor candidate, and I've been very fortunate to be in this campaign.
And Sarah, you are one of a queue of coalition hopefuls, and you're kind of at the head of the queue given that you're contesting the most marginal Labor seat in the country. You're already smiling. Is that prophetic?
Well, we've had a great day. I think we've run a very solid grassroots campaign, Annabelle. We missed out very narrowly in 2010, and everything is crossed that we can get over the line tonight.
Fiona, there's so much going on in Queensland. I mean, it's a very key state. You've got a very visible and relevant state government. You've got most of the colourful candidates. And, of course, you've got a Prime Minister that's only 9 weeks old back in the job. Of all that fuzz of noise, what's actually cutting through? What are people really talking about in Brisbane?
Look, every day when I'm out talking with voters, they're raising the issues of education, health and jobs, and Labor has a positive plan around all of those. So I've been really proud to be out campaigning on our issues of a better plan for schools, on National Disability Insurance Scheme, and to try and save jobs. And Labor's a proud history of 1 million jobs almost created in the last 6 years.
Are you hearing a lot about the leadership? What do people think about this last-minute change?
Look, I have to say Kevin's return to the leadership has been very well received in Brisbane, and I think it's actually helped my campaign greatly.
Back to you, Sarah. What's your feeling on the ground there today? You've obviously, it's a huge electorate. You've been pretty busy since early in the morning, I imagine. What are you feeling about the result on the ground?
Well, Annabelle, I've run today like I've run my whole campaign. I've been all across this vast and very diverse electorate, right from Colac through to the Bellarine and in Geelong. So the feeling, I think, is positive. I've always had the view that it's going to be very close, that every single vote will count. Certainly, though, a lot of people have been saying to me right across this electorate, it's time for Labor to go. We've had enough.
You've got a pretty high rate of pre-polls in that seat, haven't you, at the moment? Because obviously, particularly in Geelong, there are other commitments that are football related. How's that going to pan out for you, do you think?
Well, there are about 20,000 voters who voted early, and then there are about 8,000 more who have submitted an application for a postal vote. So it's a very high number of people who have voted early, and I think what that will mean is that we may not know the result tonight. They will be all counted, well, at least we hope so tonight, but it may not be possible that we'll get everything through. And of course, last time we waited quite some time before the result came through. So we may be sitting on the edge of our seat tonight and well into next week.
Fiona, back to you for a minute. You do have a recent example of a Liberal state government on whom the federal Labor campaign has been pinning a lot of its rhetorical hopes. How relevant has Campbell Newman's government been to your local campaign?
I'd have to say every day that I've been out, people have been talking to me about the cuts that are going on here and how it's changing their lives, and not for the better. So many people here are concerned, if this is what Campbell Newman has done in Queensland, what will Tony Abbott look like if he becomes the Prime Minister?
And finally, Sarah, what are your plans from tomorrow if tonight goes the way that you hope it will?
Well, we're just taking it one step at a time, Annabelle. Of course, the count has just said there's some excitement, as you can hear, in Bowen Heads.
Are you seriously still arguing that you think you're a possible 50-50 not to win this seat?
Well, look, I have been here before where we narrowly missed out, so I'm not taking anything for granted. We're really keeping everything crossed that we will get across the line. But it's just one step at a time, but really, as I say, hoping that we can get those votes in and declare victory for the Liberals in Corangamite, because it's been a very sorry time for people here in Geelong with the terrible loss of jobs and the incompetence and dysfunction of Labor. So I think many, many people are really welcoming a fresh start under an Abbott government.
Well, you are both admirably prudent and cautious early stage of the evening candidates. I wish you a long and happy evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Annabelle.
We're broadcasting live from the ABC Election Centre, where we're joined by ABC Local Radio, News Radio and ABC Online. And continuing the tally room tradition, a strong crowd of engaged citizens here to celebrate or perhaps later drown their sorrows. In the studios of ABC News 24, Tony Jones will be talking with senior members of the major parties as the count unfolds. He's with Labor's Health Minister, Tanya Plibersek, and Liberal frontbench Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. And Connie, let's start with you. Now, one of your party heavyweights, Michael Kroger, 4:39 p.m, called the election. That's how confident he is. How are you feeling?
Well, I think I'll wait till some of the votes start coming in, Tony.
Michael's jumped the gun, has he?
I think he has probably jumped the gun very enthusiastically, but I think we'll wait for some of the results to start coming through.
He's often running on exit polls. The first exit poll by Newspoll has Labor losing 21 seats. The coalition overall winning 25 for 97 seats in the House of Reps. Is that what you're aiming at this point?
Look, at this stage, there's no figure in the sense that we've run a tough campaign. We always said it was going to be like climbing Mount Everest. I've spent the last 7 or 8 days of this campaign basically on pre-poll booths around Western Sydney and on the Central Coast. And I think the clear message there to me was that the electorate is very much fed up. It's fed up with the dysfunction, the chaos that's been the last 6 years. And I guess Tony's message that do you want another 3 years like the last 6 years has really resonated. And I guess one story encapsulates it for me, and it was at a pre-poll booth in Werriwa. And it was an 80-year-old lady who came up and took a Liberal how to vote and told me that she'd been a Labor voter since she was 21 years of age. So she'd voted for Labor for 59 years, and she said, "I've had enough. I am not voting for the Labor Party this time." Took our how to votes, went to vote, and basically that was her story. And I know that story has been repeated right around, certainly in Western Sydney, repeatedly. And that's really the message, I think, of this election. People are sick and tired of the last 6 years, and they certainly don't want another 3 years of it.
Let's go to Tanya Plibersek. What's it like coming to the end of a long, gruelling campaign and knowing that the main issue for you at the end of it is the scale of the defeat you're facing?
Well, we've still got a few hours to go in West Australia, so I'm not going to, just like Connie's not claiming victory yet, I'm not conceding defeat yet. But it has been a tough campaign. We certainly went in as underdogs. I think it's been very difficult to make up ground during the campaign.
Has it been a poorly run campaign?
Oh, no, I'm not saying that at all. But one of the things that Connie and her friends keep talking about is chaos and dysfunction. And I think my enduring memory of the last 3 years will be of Tony Abbott saying no to absolutely everything. We had a Liberal leader of the opposition who said no to small business tax cuts, something that you would think would be an article of faith for the Liberal Party.
He could be saying yes to a very big mandate by the end of this evening. Will you give it to him? Will you accept, if he wins by a landslide, that he actually has a mandate for all his policies?
Let's just see how the evening goes. I think we'll be here for a few hours and we'll see the results as they come.
We will be. Now, Labor will be scouring the electoral map tonight, searching for any bright spots. Do you think you'll find any?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of seats that we might pick up. We've run some very strong candidates. The candidate in Solomon in the Northern Territory, Luke Gosling, I think has run a fantastic campaign, and that's a very close seat. You were just talking to Fiona McNamara, and she's a marvellous candidate. She's really run a terrific campaign.
You're saying you might have a hope of picking up Solomon?
Well,
are you thinking like that? Is the campaign team thinking like that?
Yeah, I live in hope.
What about Western Sydney? It's critical, obviously, for this election campaign, and we've got McMahon, for example, where the Treasurer, Chris Bowen, is battling really for his survival. Any news, any early news from the scrutineers?
Look, I think there's some very close seats in Western Sydney. There's obviously some that we're quite concerned about. It's incredible to think that in this environment where Tony Abbott believes he's marching to victory, that they had so many of the coalition candidates in hiding in Western Sydney. They think they're going to just slide in with minimal scrutiny, and including Jamie Diaz, who I don't know whether he's allowed to go to his own celebration tonight if he should win, because he's been in hiding through the rest of the campaign.
I better get Connie Rovanti-Wells to come in on that. I mean, are you hiding away some of these lesser-known candidates?
He was certainly out and about when I was in Greenway last week. No, I don't think that's the case. Look, anyone can have a difficult moment. We've all been in politics a long time, and so we have good interviews and we have bad interviews. It was an unfortunate circumstance that happened with James, but as the Prime Minister said himself, said afterwards, it can happen to anyone. Even Tony said it can happen to anyone. And certainly James has been out there campaigning. He was certainly out there with me. And look, in the end, the message was basically, whether it's James Diaz or any other candidate in Western Sydney or all over Australia, and that is our message of 3 years of dysfunction and chaos, and the reality is...
Okay, all right, we're back in the campaign at the moment, and here we are on election night. We'll come back to both of you shortly. We'll go back now to the main studio.
And we've got some early figures in, so we might just take a look at those, Anthony Green.
Yeah, well, very, very, very early figures. We just got a couple of New South Wales seats. Page, as you can see, a tiny number of votes. 60% for the Nationals, 27% for Janelle Saffin. She's held by the National Party. I think this is by the Labor Party. Two very small booths, so you can't actually sort of make too many predictions yet on it. But on these numbers, there's a 2.8% swing, so we'll be coming back to that through the night. Richmond next door, which is showing a 10.9% swing in that election. If you look at the candy bars there, you can see, again, they're very small numbers. And we've got the one that everybody always wants to watch, which is Eden Monaro. It's the tiny Numarella booth, 61 votes to something or other there. It's a swing of 23%, but it's a tiny booth. It's one small booth at New Morella. So you don't want to read too much into the very first booths, Kerry.
No, but even so, it's worth getting a quick response.
I think Anthony's right. There'll be small booths from outlying hamlets and a couple of small towns, National Party strongholds, so I wouldn't read too much into that. With both Mike Kelly and Janelle Saffin, they've got that
Two very strong local members.
That's right, good strong local members, got that regional advantage where they can maximise the local incumbency. We need to wait and see some of the votes come in from some of the regional centres and in Mike Kelly, particularly Queanbeyan.
But they're interesting seats, aren't they? I mean, Eden Monaro, as we know, has always gone with government since the war, and, well, forever. And in the case of Richmond and Page, these are seats that will often swing.
That's right. Well, Eden Monaro's got pretty much the perfect record. It swings with the governments of the day, and my memory is that Page has been with the government of the day for the vast bulk of the decade since the 1980s.
Yeah. Arthur, in terms of how things are likely to go in New South Wales generally, since we happen to have tapped into those three seats, where is Western Sydney really going to be the big spot for you in the state?
Yeah, very much so. A, because there are a lot of seats there, and B, I think we're going to see a repeat of what happened at both the state government and local government level. I think the Labor vote in New South Wales is being impacted by the damage on the brand from other things as well been going on here. Western Sydney is the big area just by the number of seats. The Central Coast, I think, will swing with Western Sydney on the whole, even though there are some complications up there. Eden Monaro, I think if national issues are predominating in this election, will tend to go that way. There's been some exit polling by Crosby Textor of issues, and the economy has tended to come up as a major issue, which we can debate later why, but the economy seems to be coming up as an important issue, including in places like Brisbane, in the seat of Brisbane.
Which is interesting, isn't it, given that the economy, compared to the rest of the world, is in such good shape, and we have endlessly overseas visitors coming to Australia who are in the global economic game and political game, who are staggered at how much there is a sense in Australia that we're in bad shape.
Well, I think when people look back at this period, when the dust of history settles and you forget about the day-to-day political combat, one of the questions people will ask, well, here is a government, it managed the country and the economy through the global financial crisis. The economic parameters were actually good when a handover to the next government came. Why wasn't that translated into political effect or into political benefit? And in the end, I agree with Arthur's early analysis, in the end it's the politics of division which in the end just cripples you when you're trying to go from incumbent government to being re-elected.
But it wasn't just the politics of division, was it? It was across a whole range of areas, politics poorly played. I mean, wasn't there a failure at the leadership level to communicate that the economy fundamentally was in good shape?
Well, we'll probably get right down to the tin tacks of that later in the night. I think the fundamental difficulty for us, when governments have to earn their stripes and go from term 1 to term 2 or term 2 to term 3, if you can't get to first base because there's been a ribbon of personality politics and personality division, then you can't get to first base. It's the old disunity is death. Just a very general point, though. Just quickly, there was a chance as this election came to its conclusion when we started that there'd be one of two models, 1993 or 1996, and we held out some hope that it might be 1993 when the weight went on Tony. The first results that came in 1993 were from Bass and Braddon in Tasmania, and they were big swings to Labor. So I think we are looking, as I said earlier, this is a 1996 type election. The question will be, how far will the blows go to the loss of Labor seats?
Indeed. And later tonight, the party leaders will be addressing their supporters at two very different functions. Labor's headquarters for tonight is going to be at the iconic Gabba Cricket Ground in Brisbane. Chris Uhlmann is with the Liberal Party at Sydney's Four Seasons Hotel. Now, Heather Ewart, I would imagine to the extent that there is a mood this early in the night, it would probably be sombre. And I do wonder at the choice of the Gabba Cricket Ground given the state of the Australian cricket team at the moment.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but let me put it this way. Here at this function room at the Gabba, they haven't exactly been rushing to get here. The Rudd team, his supporters and staff, I think because they know it's not going to be much of a party here tonight. And he certainly won't be coming till later in the evening. He's watching all the results come in elsewhere, we think at home. It's been a rather strange, I must say, polling day for him. He was saying that he was going to vote first thing this morning. We were all set to go and film that. Then he changed his mind, said it wouldn't be until lunchtime. When that vote did happen, it was a debacle because the Australian Electoral Commission hadn't been informed, said there was no permission for cameras. So that backfired badly as well, as have many other things, I guess, on this long campaign. He then spent the afternoon tweeting at home to people who perhaps hadn't made up their minds yet. Instead of, in my experience, normally leaders go around the polling booths to try and encourage voters to go in their favour. So an odd day, but it's all too late now.
What about where you are, Chris Yeoman? Are there any evidence of secret champagne shipments, or is everyone being far too grown up to be wildly exultant at this early stage?
I think there are some champagne corks popping behind the scenes already. There's an expectant mood here, there's a buoyant mood here. All of the news that's coming in so far from what they've heard on the polling booth points to very good news for them this evening. There's a big gathering upstairs that includes John Howard, it includes Alexander Downer and Peter Costello. So I'd like to be a fly on the wall when John Howard and Peter Costello cross paths this evening, but obviously the coalition is expecting to take government this evening. And one of the things that they are telling us at this stage is that there's been this huge surge of people through postal and pre-poll balloting, and they expect, particularly with the pre-polls, that essentially towards the end of the evening, the largest booth in any of the electorates, in every one of the electorates, is going to be the pre-poll. And they expect that if they look like they're doing slowly early in the evening, that there'll be a surge late in the evening. If they look like they're doing well early in the evening, then that points to a bloodbath later in the evening.
Chris, were you surprised at the speed with which the apparent Rudd support collapsed so early in the campaign?
It's really interesting, Kerry, during the course of that time, and I know there were a few very shaky weeks for the coalition. People were saying that Tony Abbott wasn't really on his game. Some inside the coalition were saying that. But there were members inside that tight-knit group of leaders who were saying this will flame out, that the fundamentals have not changed, that people are having a look again at the Labor Party because of the change with Julia Gillard, but they always believed that it would flow back. And when it did start to flow back, they did believe that it would return pretty much to where they expected it would be. So although there were some real signs of nervousness in the coalition about the return of Kevin Rudd, there were a lot of people who within the leadership group who believed that it would never last. But that was really the story of this campaign, wasn't it? That Kevin Rudd was supposed to be the person who saved the Labor Party, and now forever, I guess, depending on the result this evening, people may debate whether or not that was worth the effort.
Heather, Stephen was comparing before and wondering whether this was going to turn into a 1993 or a 1996 type result, and I think he's tending towards the latter. How do the latter parts of this campaign compare to Paul Keating's in 1996?
Well, I think for a start, the figures were certainly the private party polling for Paul Keating was a lot better than what they've been getting for Kevin Rudd. I'm informed that the party's research shows that there will be a national swing against Labor of 4 to 5%. But the real killer is going to be, which of course everyone has been focusing on, the real killer will be in Sydney. The research, I think, is showing that there could be an 8% swing there, 10 to 12 seats lost, and that could well include the Treasurer Chris Bowen, who's really on a knife edge. Their polling throughout the campaign has not been showing that he can get quite across the line. So that's the one they'll be really focusing on. In Queensland, the swing, they think, their research anyway, is pointing to a swing of 2.5 to 3%, which would mean 3 seats lost. The former Treasurer, Wayne Swan, is really struggling with his seat. He's been in that situation before and has been fighting a hard campaign, but that is one that they're worried about too.
Well, as we all know, there are plenty of seats in play tonight, some of them with some big political fish, including potentially the Prime Minister himself. Thanks to both of you, and perhaps we'll hear later from you in the evening. Thanks. because we actually do have some more early numbers now from Anthony Green.
Yes, well, let's have a look at, we've got some figures from Braddon down in Tasmania, where Sid Sidebottom was trying to win re-election. He was defeated in 2004, came back in 2007, and we've got some figures from 4 booths on primaries and 2 on 2 candidate preferred. Brett Whiteley's well ahead. There's a lot of small rural booths at the southern end of the electorate that do come in first. But when we actually compare them booth by booth, we're actually seeing a swing of 14.8% there. So that's quite a substantial first swing, but it is only on 2 booths with a preference count. Now let's go to the map, and we'll go back to Eden Monaro, which is, of course, the seat where there's always a great deal of interest. And what we're seeing there in the candy bars, again, significant number, it's only a small number of votes. We've got the Durangle booth is in with a preference count, and it's showing a 7.1% swing. Now, everything I'm seeing at the moment is swings against the Labor Party, but these are very small. Nothing's over 0.5% yet, but all the early figures are bad for the Labor Party, and it's 6:30 at night, and everything's looking bad for the Labor Party.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, normally you would approach these sorts of figures with caution, but when you're getting such a kind of universal response, even across a few seats, it's telling, I would think, the start of a story.
If I wanted to be daring, I'd call the election now, but I think I would try. I personally think I should wait 10 minutes.
I've seen you occasionally daring it.
I thought I already had.
Yes, Stephen called it before the vote counted, before they began counting the votes. It could be that kind of night. Now we've got Tony Jones standing by in his studio with some more conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. 10 minutes, I think we're going to hear something from Anthony on the actual result, or calling the result of the election. I mean, are you absolutely now thinking you've won this election?
I'm a very cautious person, Tony, so I think I'll just wait a little bit longer. Look,
what's your caution born of? Because it does seem to be a lot of information now coming in suggesting...
I just... And until I get a few more results, and until we start getting some confirmation from some of our key people on the ground, I'm not prepared to say that we've won this. Look, can I just pick up on some of those early trends in some of those seats, particularly in Tasmania? I think that that's very interesting to see Brett Whiteley in there. He's run a very good campaign. He's been a former state member of Parliament down there, so he's run a very good campaign. So has our candidate in Bass, Nikolic, has done really, really well. Just in terms of some of these campaigns, I think before we were talking about Western Sydney, one of the things that's, I think, marred, though, what's been happening in Western Sydney has been some of the very much the negativity. It's been a very, very negative campaign in some of these seats, particularly for Ray King and McMahon. I think that we will be looking at McMahon in quite some detail, but it's been very, very much a
McMahon's a critical seat, as we know. We were talking to Tanya Plibersek about that earlier. So what sort of information are you getting? Are you making the case that the negativity is starting to get Chris Bowen over the line?
Well, no, I'm just saying that certainly when I was on pre-poll the other day, there were quite a number of people who were quite put off by the campaign that had been run against Ray King. He was seen as very much a police officer of good standing. He's been there, I think, about 40 years as a policeman. I think some of the campaign that was run against him has worked in the opposite direction, because there was certainly a lot of people on that pre-poll when I was there saying to me that it had had the opposite effect. In other words, they were voting for Ray King because of the campaign and the sort of negativity that had been run by Mr Bowen in that seat.
Tanya Plibersek, well, I mean, we just heard Heather Hewitt say that Chris Bowen may well be in more trouble than you imagine. I mean, that would be a disaster for Labor to lose someone of his stature, wouldn't it?
It would be a terrible loss indeed, because he's made a great contribution to the Parliament. But in my most recent communications, I think we'd say we're quietly confident of keeping Chris. There's probably 6 seats, I'd say, that we're more nervous about in Western Sydney, and 3 outside Sydney in other parts of New South Wales. But
the 2 Central Coast seats are absolutely critical. You expect to lose those?
I'd say I'm very nervous about 9 seats in New South Wales, yep.
And, well, the exit poll's saying 14 in New South Wales will go to the coalition, so maybe we'll see further developments during the course of the
exit polls.
I've got to ask you this, because the first serious leak from the campaign appeared in The Australian today, with reports that the old Kevin Rudd had resurfaced during the campaign, refused to actually take direction from the campaign headquarters, started running the show from his own aeroplane, that he was the thought bubbles on policy were coming from Kevin Rudd directly, and then without any reference to the Melbourne campaign headquarters, things like the big tax cut in the Northern Territory to companies, for example, shocked those in the campaign headquarters, according to a Labor insider. It's quite a worry, isn't it, that the campaign headquarters have started leaking on the actual day of the vote?
Well, I'm certainly not going to get involved in any of that sort of talk. I think that any recriminations in public or in private will only make things worse, and it's up to all of us, particularly elected members of Parliament, to take responsibility collectively for the good times and the bad.
OK, well, more on this later. We'll cross back to Kerry in the main studio now.
And we're going to continue going through some early figures as they come to hand. There'll be no particular pattern to it. We're just going to go for seats that are going to help us put the early story together. Anthony, we're going to start with the seat of Capricornia. This is central Queensland, centred around the city of Rockhampton. Kirsten Livermore is the retiring Labor member. She's been there since 1998. ALP went into this election with a 3.7% margin. I know they're early figures, but what are they saying?
Well, let's have a look at those first figures that are coming up here, and they're the numbers there, 52. I've just a slight update, and the LNP is not quite as high, and the figures are a little bit sort of short of that. But let's just run through these figures.
Yep.
There are a lot of small rural areas and big mining towns in this electorate, so it's quite diverse. When we factor in the preferences that are coming, I think I've got a preference count on 1 booth in these numbers. And the swing is only 0.4% at this stage. So the Labor Party's ahead in that seat was certainly not giving that seat away. That's a seat that we'll be watching a lot tonight, but it's an extremely diverse electorate, Capricornia.
Now, the seat of Kingsford Smith in Sydney's eastern suburbs has been, traditionally, one of the very safest of Labor seats, and it's just been whittling and whittling in the last couple of elections. Peter Garrett is retiring. He held the seat in 2004. Going into this election, Kingsford Smith was 5.2% margin for Labor.
And Matt Thistlethwaite's the new, always a great tongue twister, that one. Matt Thistlethwaite's the new Labor candidate transferring from the Senate. Michael Fennelly's the Liberal candidate, a cardiologist from St Vincent's Hospital. He's behind on first preferences. We've got 2 airport booths and 1 from Daceyville South, which is showing an overall swing towards the Labor Party. That's very early figures at this stage, but and given that the airport booths is not always the same person's voting at them from one election to another, at this stage you wouldn't call Kingsford Smith, but we're just running through the early figures to keep everybody an eye across them. OK, now the seat of Hunter, this is in the Hunter region, with, I suppose, a little northwest of Newcastle itself. Joel Fitzgibbon has held this seat since 1996, with a 12.5% margin going into this campaign. We've got 1.3% of the vote counted. And his father held it for 13 years before that, so it's quite a long time in the Fitzgibbon family. Michael Johnson, the Nationals are running in this seat. Now, this is a bit like Capricornia. There's all coal mining at the southern end, and there's lots of rural properties. The wine industry is in the electorate and extends straight right up into the rural parts of the Upper Hunter. And on these figures, we're seeing a swing of 17.5%. Now, that swing figure is on 1 booth. It's actually got 2 booths now, and the swing figure has come down to 12.8. We've got 6 primary booths, so we can't call that, but again, that's another one of those figures that we're seeing an early swing in.
But what that does show, of course, is the volatility of these early figures, but nonetheless a swing.
Nonetheless, I'll just say that what I am saying is I've got 1 seat which Labor is ahead in a seat they don't hold, and I've got 10 where the coalition is ahead in a seat they don't hold. When you're seeing that sort of thing on early figures, you're sort of seeing a trend that's going against the government.
Stephen Smith, you're also getting some figures in across a number of seats. What are they saying broadly?
Well, generally the same as what we've heard from Anthony. I've got a couple of of returns in where there's either a small result for Labor, which is a swing towards us, or it's status quo. But again, it's too early. The trend is, when you look at it, everything is going against Labor in the seats where it counts. Both the two seats we've just looked at, Capricornia and Peter Garrett's old seat, Kingsford Smith, there I think you'll find one of the effects of tonight is that if you are an incumbent, you will, when it gets down to the cutting edge, have an advantage. So in those two seats which we hold, we've got good, in the case of Capricornia, long-standing, well-respected member retiring. In Peter Garrett's case, less period of time, but high-profile ministers. So we've got two new candidates in. And so that'll be harder to win than an incumbent will find that defending. On the Tasmanian stuff, we either get 4 out or 5 out of Tasmania historically. On paper, essentially you can count Wilkie in the Labor column. I think Wilkie will probably hold his seat, but we will be under pressure in the 4 seats we hold in Tasmania.
Yep.
And, we are buttering it, sort of preparing to be buffered in Tasmania to a very large extent.
Arthur Sinodinos, are you getting any early feedback?
Some feedback from Western Sydney, which is consistent with this pattern of there's a big vote emerging, but I mean, I'm not going to talk about seats like McMahon because I think there are special factors at work there. So, but I haven't got anything that is really definitive.
No, but it's the trend, I think, that's telling the story.
Yeah.
Anthony, we're going to look at the seat of Fairfax, I think.
Yes, I'm just going to bring this one up first because this is the seat Clive Palmer is contesting. We'll go on and do more detailed seats in a moment. Let's just look at Fairfax for the moment because what we're seeing here is the LNP vote is on 43% and Clive Palmer's on 29%. So this is the one seat where you thought the Palmer's United Party might have a chance of winning. Now, I won't go into any detail on that, but I just thought I'd toss it up as the first figures. But we can now go on to actually look at some more detailed figures off the full screen graphics.
Okay, well, the seat of Moreton, this is one of the seats very much in play. This is Brisbane's inner southern suburbs. Graham Perrott won this seat in 2007 and held it again in 2010, but he's on a margin of only 1.1%.
And it's a very small joint booth at Holland Park West, so it's not always the most reliable booths. And when you look at the numbers there, you'll see they're quite small. But we'll go through and show what we're estimating the swing to be in this one individual lecture. Quite a vote there for the Greens, 18%. It is one booth, so that just shouldn't take too much of that. But it's a small swing to Labor. But as I said, that is one small joint booth, and it's probably outside of the electorate.
Okay, Eden Monero, we've already raised a couple of times tonight. This is Mike Kelly's seat. A minister in the Labor government. He's held it since 2007. This is the great barometer seat of federal politics. He's on a margin of 4.2%, very early count, but a swing against him.
And he's up against Peter Hendy, who's the former head of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and used to work for various ministers in the Howard government. He's ahead on first preferences. We've now got a preference count in 3 polling places indicating a 3.1% swing to the Liberal Party. Not enough to change the results in there yet, but the Labor Party's ahead. But again, 3 small booths, that's too early to call.
The campaign manager there is saying that he's finding it volatile as they go around. So so there's no foregone conclusion on that seat, I don't reckon.
No. The seat of Lyons in Tasmania. This takes up a huge part of central Tasmania. It's been held by Dick Adams for Labor since 1993. You'd say a safe margin there, 12.3%, but even that seat is in play potentially tonight.
Yes, and Eric Hutchinson ran at the last election. Now, the thing to say about Lyons is he's only defeated one sitting member in the last 70 years. He's only had 3 members since 1946. Dick Adams, he'll be a tough man to dislodge in that electorate. On those first figures, he's well behind. And when we compare the 3 booths we've got, which is Bishop, Bourne, Fingal, and I think it's Mayenne, there's an 18% swing. But I will point out there are 3 small booths and there's 100 polling places in that electorate. There isn't an electorate that's more diverse in the country than Lyons.
Yeah. Right. It's, in some respects, it's the most regionalised electorate in the country, lots of small hamlets. Anthony said that, Big Dick Adams would be hard to dislodge from the seat. Well, Big Dick's hard to dislodge from anything, I can assure you that. But he is...
I hope he doesn't mind you saying
he's the class of 93. He is a very, very good local member. So he if he's going under in Lyons, then it's because there's a very big swing against us in Tasmania. But he'll be under pressure. Instinct would be that you'd expect that he would hang on to it. but we'll be under pressure in the other seats in Tassie, Bass and Braddon.
OK, we're going to keep the seats going now. We're going to look at McEwen in central Victoria. This was won at the last election by Rob Mitchell for Labor. It was on a margin of 9.2%. We've got just short of 1% of the vote counted. What's that saying, Anthony?
It's showing an absolutely massive swing, but in a moment I'll explain why. Donna Petrovic is moving from the upper house. Rob Mitchell moved from the upper house a couple of years ago, the Victorian upper house. So this is a contest for a seat which has been made safer for Labor by the redistribution. But on the current numbers, he's showing an extraordinary 22% swing. And one thing I'm just a bit cautious about there is one of the booths I've got reported is Jackson's Hill, which took 2,000 votes last time. I wouldn't expect to see a polling place with 2,000 votes report its vote and its preference count in 45 minutes in a field of 10 candidates. So I think there's something wrong with those numbers on those first numbers. I can't imagine that booth is the first one to report.
OK, the seat of Page on the New South Wales North Coast. Janelle Saffin won this seat in 2007 for Labor. She's on a margin of 4.2%. She's regarded as a very effective local member, but there's a significant swing against her with 5.2% of the vote counted.
Yes, and what we're seeing, we've got polling places with a preference count. There are 14 first preference booths. There's a significant lead there for the National Party. When we've got a preference count, we're factoring in from 8 out of 90 of the polling places. And what we're seeing in that electorate is a swing of 8.4% at this stage. We're saying that's a net gain. I'm always a little bit more cautious than some of these seats early on in the figures, but those numbers are looking not too good for the Labor Party there.
Well, that's one seat that might have stemmed the tide a little bit. And an 8% swing with 5% of the vote counted in Page, I would suggest is significant. Now, Stephen Smith, you've got some figures from Wayne Swan's
from Wayne's seat. Yeah, Wayne's margin is just over 3.2. From the scrutiny is 2,500 votes counted, and the swing against him is less than 2%. So very early. I spoke to Wayne a couple of times during the day. He was getting a good response, he thought, from doing the rounds of the booths, and despite the burden of being treasurer for 6 years, he's an assiduous local member. So that's a good early sign, but Lily will, I think, be one of the ones we'll be looking right down to the end of the night. But that's a good early sign from Wayne, and that'll as much be about his personal standing as a local member, an assiduous, hard-working local member over a long period of time.
Arthur, you'd regard those numbers in Page as pretty promising?
Well, yeah, it's looking good. But what I find interesting tonight is that they're early figures, but they do bounce between different seats. So it's seats that I wouldn't have normally counted in as being in, other seats you'd expect to be treated. Yeah, that's right. And in Tassie, the only thing I'll say about the seat of Lyons is that Eric Hutchinson's been running for 2 elections, and 5 years he's basically been on the trail. So he's developed a lot of local profile, and the government down there is on the nose, and I think those sorts of factors may play into the results in Tassie more generally.
Tassie, an incumbent state government over a period of years and coming off a high vote. So I think the question in Tassie will be how many do we lose? That's the question in Tassie.
OK. Now, of course, one of the high-profile candidates at this election, and dare I say it, a surprise high-profile candidate, was Peter Beattie in Queensland, the former Premier, who was a very successful populist Premier for a long time, went into retirement and came back, you'd have to say, in spectacular style and with very significant expectation by Kevin Rudd and others, and the story may well turn out to be different. Annabelle?
Yes, Peter Beattie's joining us now from his temporary home in Ford, which we might call the Beattie Ford Centre. Welcome, Peter.
What do we do? Annabelle, thank you. Good to talk to you.
Now, it's a very, very long time in your career since you've contested a seat and lost, but the swing seems to be on, and you're trying to win an LNP seat, so it's not looking great, I think it's fair to say.
That's probably an understatement. I would put it in the political category of bloody difficult, which is a political term, as you know. Look, the reality is that we'll have to wait until we see the figures, Annabelle. I don't have any yet. But look, I expect this to be very difficult. We've worked hard. I've had a great local team here. I came back for the right reasons because I felt I could make a difference, and when I spoke to Kevin, it was suggested that I could help lift the Labor vote, and that was important. not just in terms of Queensland, but what we could contribute here in Ford. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. I don't have any regrets, and I did it for the right reasons. Whether I win or lose, that's the will of the people. I believe in democracy, and if that's their decision, then I accept it unreservedly. We still don't know that yet. We'll just have to wait and see.
Peter Beattie, there were a few hard-to-swallow propositions floated over the course of this Labor campaign, that you could invent a tax system for the Northern Territory, that you'd review foreign investment policy, and there was the proposition that Peter Beattie and Kevin Rudd were new best friends. Do you think that was just a little too hard to swallow as a proposition?
Oh, look, the result is based on one overriding thing, and people will speculate, but I've been on the ground talking to people. The only negative for us, which was a very strong negative in my view, was that the leadership divisions that took place over the last 6 years. People didn't like division, and that played into the Tony Abbott view about change. That's what happened. And people will, you know, they will dissect the gizzards and pull out bits and pieces, but that is the reason why this election is going the way it is. That is the core issue. And the Liberal National Party put a photo of Julia and Kevin at the booths and simply put the word underneath, remember. That's where the damage was done. People felt they wanted change for that reason. And as I said, you can talk about all the other things, but I spoke to people on the ground. That is the key reason.
Well, in view of your remarks then, was what happened 9 weeks ago something that made things better or worse?
Oh, look, that's too hard to judge. I don't think it mattered in the sense that that overriding concern about division was in the community. People, frankly, just thought that it had gone on for too long. And
I just mean that
stability.
If instability was a problem, then a further change exacerbates that problem, right?
Oh, I don't know that it did. I think it was the whole perception of disunity, if you like. And we all know disunity is death in politics. Unity is a strength. And what Tony Abbott did was put up a unified team. We certainly had one under Kevin, there's no doubt about that, because Julia exited the scene in a constructive way, but it was the accumulative effect of 6 years. And that's played into the spirit of, frankly, it's time for change. That's what happened. I mean, as I said, people have different reasons, but that's what really happened.
Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight, Peter Beattie.
Okay, we're going to continue the seat runs, and we're going to look at the seat of Indi in northeast Victoria. This has been held by Sophie Mirabella for the Liberal Party since 2001 on a margin of 9%, but there was some anticipation that she might run into trouble from an independent named Cathy McGowan. We've got 3.6% of the vote count. Anthony, what's the story?
And what we're seeing in Indi up here, let's look at the candy bars. The Sophie Mirabella is currently on 49.2%. The Cathy McGowan 29, Labor 10. Now, those figures aren't corrected for the polling place, so I can't tell you where they're from. But if you would expect them to be rural areas coming in first, areas which are normally strong for the coalition, so clearly there's a split in the coalition vote. There's no way I can say anything sensible about who's going to win that electorate on those figures. But it does show that the contest is coming from Cathy McGowan in Indi.
And that she's going to potentially be in serious play tonight.
I think it's too early to call that.
No,
it's very hard to know from those numbers.
But
she needs to get just above 30 to really start to...
And it's very hard to know. We have no way of correcting that sort of information.
But clearly that's one we're going to keep an eye on.
And Arthur's point about the primary vote pile is right, because both the Green preferences and Labor preferences go against Sophie to the independent. So.
Okay, now we'll look at the seat of Bass. This is a seat that has endlessly changed hands over the years. Launceston and other parts of northeast Tasmania. Jeff Lyons took it for Labor in 2010 on a margin of 6.7%, and we've now got 3.1% of the vote counted.
Yes, and Andrew Nikolic is the new Liberal candidate, 3-decade veteran of the Australian Army, a paratrooper. He's behind on those numbers, which are actually, I've got numbers which are updating quicker than that. It's currently saying at 10%, 54.3. Yeah, look, that is a swing which is based on one polling place from Lady Barron Island, so it's not a reliable swing figure. But at this stage, on the first preferences, the Liberals are miles ahead. Sometimes the two-candidate preferred swing doesn't carry the story. But at this stage, there's a swing of at least 6% in Bass, and I'd suspect probably more than, actually much more than that, because the Green vote is well down as well. But that seat looks like it's gone on the figures I've got, though. I'll wait a little bit longer than that. I think we should move on to the next electorate anyway.
Well, the next one's interesting. We've already had a quick look at this through Stephen Smith's figures. This is the seat of Lilly, Brisbane's northern suburbs, held by the Treasurer in the Rudd government, or rather, sorry, in the Gillard government. He's held this seat since '98 on a margin most recently of 3.2%. 5% of the vote counted. Struggling, but it's not all bad news for him.
No, these are reasonable figures. Chermside, Kalinga and Sandgate North, preference counts, they're all booths under 500. And at this stage, he's ahead on the first preferences. We've got more booths in on first preferences. Two-candidate preferred, there's only a small swing, 1.5% there. I've got 1.9% on later figures. So at this stage, Wayne Swan certainly hasn't been defeated on these numbers.
That's the best news we've had all night. So far.
You had any other good news?
The Dockers won.
but it's very consistent with what you said earlier.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, my figures were 2,500. I think that those ones up there were a bit less. But that on both of those pieces of evidence, then very early, but Wayne keeping his head above water.
Now, the seat of Latrobe, this is now down back to Melbourne. Its outer eastern suburbs. Laura Smith held this, or took this for Labor in 2010 with a margin of 1.7%. We've now had 2.2% of the vote counted, and she's on a knife edge.
Yeah, this will be a close... Look, if there's not much swing, this will be a close contest. This is the sort of seat Labor only wins at a good election. It's up in the Dandenongs. 44.1% for Jason Wood, Laura Smith there on 31.6. When we factor in the preferences and the booths, the swing is 2%. Which puts the Liberal Party ahead. So at this stage, that seat's in doubt. Now, one thing I'd like to do, Kerry, I'll tell my executive producer as I do this, as I move to my touchscreen, I'm actually going to explain why I think we can probably call this election at the moment. If I bring up our state swings, I'll show you what's occurring from state to state. In New South Wales, we're seeing a swing of 3.6%. In Victoria, we're seeing a swing of 5.2%. In Queensland, a swing of 2.4%. And if I take Queensland off and put Tasmania up, we're seeing a swing of 11%. Now, on the numbers I'm looking at of seats changing party, at this stage, I'm seeing consistently Labor behind and losing seats. I'm seeing nothing where Labor's ahead. So even if there's nothing much happening, even if it's only a smaller swing than expected, Labor is in a minority and can't win if it loses seats. So let me go and have a look at our chamber. This is showing at this stage, now I won't go on and do a prediction at this stage, but at this stage, we're giving away as 38 seats to 69. This is a number which includes coalition seats, for which we've got no number. So this is including Western Australian figures, for instance. And when we add some likelies in, we're getting the coalition to 75 and Labor is on 42. I'm saying Labor is behind in seats. The coalition is on a pretty secure 75 already. On that basis, they're going to get a majority. So I think we can say the government has been defeated. What we're having a little bit of fun and games with is trying to figure out the size of the swing. Just a comment on the opinion polls. The polls that were reported this morning and yesterday weren't showing Labor ending up under 50 seats. That was what was being reported. There's been a real disconnect between the individual seat polls in this campaign and the national polls. The national polls haven't been nearly as bad for Labor as has been reported from the local seat polls. So one of the things we're doing tonight, and maybe we'll judge this, is how reliable automated opinion polls are, because they've been a big feature of this election campaign in individual seats.
Any comment on that? This is the issue about how reliable the polls are. We're not talking so much about the... Anthony's talking about a potential disconnect between the national figures and the seat-by-seat figures.
I always worry about the individual seat polls depending on what the size of the sample is, right? But I have noticed this time they've all been consistently worse for Labor than the national poll, so maybe there's something systematic that they're describing.
I think you can run a line through the national polls, all of the respected and respectable national polls, and you touch 53, 47, 54, 46. When you go to the individual polls, I think Arthur's first point is right. Often when they do an individual seat poll, the sample's too low. And so you've got a difficulty before you start. Secondly, it's the method of sampling. There are a number of polls out there now which we call sort of robo-polls, where it's just automated, and frankly they're junk. And what occurs is you do a robo-poll with a small sample in an individual seat and then say, gosh, you know, all of these seats are going to go. You can rely upon the consistency of the national polls, which is pretty clear, 53, 54, two-party preferred to the coalition. But there's just not enough quality, depth and quantity in the individual polls because they're expensive to do for one seat, and so people skimp on the numbers and they're just not reliable. But they still get the same.
They sometimes read in some of our media outlets as if they're incredibly reliable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's an issue for us.
I guess it's an issue for us all. We're actually going to continue our seat run and we'll watch this tale continue to unfold through the night. But as Anthony has said, as everybody agrees on this panel, I guess Stephen Smith called it virtually as he sat down, it's clear that there is going to be a change of government. It's just a question of by how much. The seat of Robertson, this is on the New South Wales Central Coast. Deborah O'Neill won this seat for Labor in 2010. She's on a margin of just 1%, and with 5 or 6% of the vote counted, there's been enough of a swing, it seems, for her to be in serious trouble.
Yes, there's what's happened here is there's also a significant independent in this contest. Laurie McKenna was backed by John Singleton, who's the former coach of the Central Coast Mariners and is the mayor of Gosford at the moment. He's taken about 8% of the vote there. When we've got preferences factored in, which is about 4 polling places at the moment, we're seeing a swing of 5.3%, which is more than enough to defeat Labor, to defeat Deborah O'Neill. And I'd say on these numbers that Lucy Wicks is likely to be the new member for Robertson. That's a pretty strong-looking result at this stage.
Yeah.
Okay, the seat of Dobell, the New South Wales Central Coast. This was the seat of Craig Thompson. The less said, the better, except that he won the seat in 2007, stood down from the Labor Party. He, going into this campaign on paper, Labor had a margin of 5.1%, and that seat too is in trouble, Anthony.
Yes, and we'll stay on the first preference votes for a moment. There's Emma McBride's the daughter of a former local state member. Karen McNamara is the new Liberal candidate. Her husband was the Liberal candidate at the last election. Nathan Bracken, who's a former Test cricketer, is 8.9. What you don't see there is Craig Thompson, who's on about 5th or 6th position on 3.8%. So he's polled very poorly, as I think we vaguely expected that. But when we look at the swing that's occurring in that electorate, the swing is 8.7% to the Liberal Party, and that'll be an easy victory for the Liberal Party. You'd expect the Labor only had a candidate a couple of weeks before the election.
Okay, the seat of Barton in Sydney's southern suburbs. Robert McClelland, the former Attorney General under Kevin Rudd, and Julia Gillard. He's retiring at this election. He held the seat from 1996. Again, on paper, Labor had a margin going into this election of 6.9%. We've now had 5% of the vote counted.
This will be one we'll be coming back to during the night. It's Steve McMahon's the new Labor candidate. Is in second place behind Nicholas Varvaris, who's the mayor of Cogra. McMahon's a former mayor of Hurstville. When we look at the swing that's occurring at the moment, swing's 8.1% on these numbers. That's in doubt. That's on a preference count in 2 polling places, which is not enough to call it. But again, there's a swing to the Liberal Party. Whether that Barton falls or not, we'll be coming back to look at later in the evening.
The seat of Greenway in Sydney's western suburbs. This is part of the story that we're particularly interested in tonight, Sydney's western suburbs. Greenway was once consistently a safe Labor seat. Going into this campaign, Michelle Rowland, who took over the seat in 2010 for Labor, she held this on a 0.9% margin. We've got 2.6% of the vote counted here.
And Michelle Rowland is ahead on the first preferences, 1116 to 895, 9% ahead. Now, I've got 4 first preference booths, which are good for Labor, and 1 preference booth, which is preference count booth, which is not good for Labor. And that's the one that's producing, that one booth is still producing the 3% swing there, which puts the Liberal Party ahead. But that's as I said, it's only 1 polling place, so it's not a reliable first preference booth. But I think Greenway, of all the seats which are on small margins in Western Sydney, Greenway is the one the Liberals would be least confident about winning. I mean, a 1% seat, given what's going on, you'd normally expect to win, but clearly the problems with the candidates has just distracted the Liberal Party from the campaign in that area.
Okay, now the seat of Lindsay. It's hard to imagine a seat in the country that's had more attention than Lindsay in the outer western suburbs of Sydney. David Bradbury won this seat for Labor in 2007. He's the Assistant Treasurer. He went into it on a knife-edge margin of 1.1%. We've now had 3.8% of the vote counted. A swing to the Liberals.
And what we're seeing here is that we've got 3 polling places which are good Labor booths. Two of them are good Labor booths, and the Labor Party is miles behind on first preferences. We've got a preference count on one booth, which is Mulgoa, which is semi-rural. And in that booth, there's a 4.4% swing. But just looking at the first preferences I'm seeing there, I think the swing is actually bigger in other polling places. So I think Lindsay's a definite fall for the Labor Party there. They're very early figures, but I'm confident enough looking at the first preferences I've got to suspect the swing will be bigger than that when we get on further.
Okay, Arthur?
On Lindsay, look, someone had sent me a note that out at Mulgoa there was a 9% primary swing to us. I mean, we were expecting to win this seat, and that's what's happening. I think Anthony's right that some other seats there may be personal factors that do come into it. Greenway, there's obviously been issues around the candidate.
Has he been seen in the last couple of weeks?
Oh yeah, he's around. He's around.
He's around somewhere.
Not by his mum.
You weren't in charge of looking after him, were you, Arthur?
No, I was up the Central Coast.
So was he.
but I mean, Lindsay, you'd be expecting that sort of result, I would think.
Look, I'm just curious to know how a candidate like that actually gets through the screen.
One day I'll tell you the story off camera, because I think it does raise some issues. But look, I'm not saying Jamie's not going to win the seat. Let's just see what happens. But I don't think the Liberal Party should have kept him under wraps. Once he fell over, they should have got him on his horse again and got him out there, in my view.
Greenway's been a sort of serial problem for the Liberal Party in the last 2 elections, though, hasn't it?
Yeah, look...
late to pre-select last time.
Yeah, but that was a general issue in New South Wales. There were some debates around late selections.
Well, Lindsay, young David put in a Herculean effort last time to still remain in the Parliament. He's a very good minister. He's a very good local member, but I suspect on this occasion that the strength of the title will just be too much even for him. But we were worried about Lindsay on the last occasion, and he was one who held against the tide. But I think tonight's just going to be too much of a national swing against him to hold on his local credentials, which are significant.
Of course, what has happened over the last decade, I suppose, is that Queensland and New South Wales, broadly speaking, had become much more liberal. The southern states, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania, had kind of held out for Labor. But it would seem to me that there's unlikely to be any bright spot anywhere left in the country for Labor at the end of the night.
Well, if you take 1996 as your model, we had in that election, we lost 30-odd seats. And we had 3 or 4 seats throughout the country where we had a small swing towards us, 3 in Victoria and my own seat of Perth in Western Australia. The only bright spots I see tonight, other than good colleagues holding the ground, like Wayne, for example, is we'll win Perth with Alana McTiernan, and I suspect we'll increase the margin there. We might be an outside roughy chance in Solomon, given just...
You're saying that the margin is going to be increased now that you've left?
Yes. I'm saying that 1996 might be the model, a swing against the government and a defeat of the government, but a swing to us in Perth. Solomon we should just watch. Luke Gosling, a very good candidate up there, former member of the ADF, so that one I think might just be an outside roughie. But your general point, the last election we were saved by strong votes in South Australia, Tasmania and Victoria, a record 2-party preferred vote for us in Victoria, a very strong vote in Tassie, and despite the swing against us in New South Wales, we held the line in the marginals. Now, all of those things, to some greater or lesser extent, are catching up with us tonight.
Well, speaking of the former ADF members, we've got Mike Kelly standing by and Eden Monero, but before we cross to him, we might just take a quick look at that bellwether seat just outside Canberra in southeast New South Wales. Mike Kelly took this seat in 2007 with the change of government, holds it, or held it before tonight on a margin of 4.2%. We've now had 20% of the vote counted, Anthony.
Yeah, we've got 20% of the vote counted, and we've got quite a significant 17 of the 84 booths with preference counts. And at this stage, seeing they're the first preferences, let's factor in the polling places, which is so important to know in this electorate. And the swing is 3.1%. The Labor Party's ahead. That's not enough to call this electorate. That'll continue to be one we come back to during the evening. At this stage, there's one small Queanbeyan booths in, and Queen Anne Booth will decide that electorate. But the Labor Party would be encouraged by the figure in that. And just as a little note, as an election analyst, if Labor holds Eden Monaro and loses the election, it's one great joy for me that nobody will come to me again for years about it being the one that always goes with government. So.
Oh, yes, they will. Oh, yes, they will.
Well, putting aside Anthony Green's personal difficulties with this seat, we are happy to be joined by the current sitting member, Mike Kelly. Welcome, Mike.
G'day, Annabelle. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Anthony's in a conservative mood. Are you in a conservative mood?
Yeah, well, Anthony and I probably wish that we don't have that bell with a tag ever again, because it certainly brings a lot of attention with it. But we don't feel any pressure, of course. But it's been a really tough battle. It's going to be like it always is here. I mean, the margin I'm on at the moment, it's the largest it's been since '96, which tells you a story. It's always going to be tight. It's always going to be a challenge. But we're fighters here, and we'll just see how it pans out through the night.
Well, you've been in some pretty hostile environments as a military lawyer: Somalia, Iraq, Bosnia. How does Eden Monaro rate as a hostile environment at the moment on your experience of things?
Well, I've always said that at least in this job, no one's trying to kill me, or at least not yet. And of course,
that's an optimistic reading.
Well, in Somalia, I had a price on my head and had to listen to a radio broadcast every day telling me what they were going to do to me. So I don't mind Ray Hadley at all, and it's really more of a moral challenge, a tough physical challenge in getting around an electorate like this, and. But it's been so rewarding. I've had such a great experience working with this community to deliver the things that we've done together. And we have so much in prospect in this region, a lot of potential, which all really hinges off the central Labor policy platform.
You're starting to sound a little bit elegiac in tone there, Mike Kelly. Tell me, and I suspect this is a question we're going to be asking in one way or another all night, but you were a Rudd supporter, a supporter of the change of the leadership 9 weeks ago. Has that made it better or worse for you?
Look, I don't think it's made a big difference. People in a rural and regional seat like this really pay a lot of attention to the candidates and members. We've had a very long series of candidates debates, about 9 of them I think altogether, in every one of the towns in this region, and they pay a lot of attention to that. So it is always a significant factor in how they make their decisions, overlaid of course with some of the national factors. But I've made no secret of the fact that I didn't agree with what happened in 2010, and I think that's some of the baggage we've carried in our saddles. But people here have concentrated, I think, a lot on what the actual policy outcomes have been from the government, and that's been a hell of a story to tell.
What about in Tintac's campaign terms? Having a change of leadership so close to the campaign has obviously made some things difficult. How do you rate the campaign nationally?
Look, it's always tough to run a campaign in circumstances where you've got, a foreign billionaire telling his empire how to campaign against you. And that's no secret. It's quite an obvious situation. Very, very tough to do that. But, the key things that we are focused on are the things that mean a lot to everyday people's lives. The better schools, the national broadband network is so critical to a rural and regional area like this. And of course, the Clean Energy Future is delivering over $1 billion of investment into this region alone. So, those sort of things are the things that got people's attentions here. They didn't really focus a lot on some of the, obvious commentary on personalities and leadership and the rest of it. They were more concerned about what will mean something to them in the future and the future of their kids.
Well, Mike, we're going to have to leave it there. I'll leave you to cluster with your supporters around the television. Thank you.
No worries. Cheers, Annabelle.
We're going to keep looking at the figures and the story that they tell. Anthony is now going to take us through a breakdown of the likely look of the chamber.
Yeah. We'll fill in the chamber for the first time tonight. Let's bring it up blank, and we'll fill in first the seats we've definitely given away, including a few seats where there's no votes but are so safe for one side or the other you can be confident. And I'm sorry, that's the current chamber. Let me go to the seats that have been won. Before, Labor thought they had 72 seats there. Labor's on 34, the Coalition is on 68, Greens yet to win a seat because Melbourne, we've no figures for Melbourne, and others to come. That's the one, which I've hit the button again, first fail for the night, have the first drink, everyone. And likely is Labor on 37 seats, the Coalition is on 74, and others 1. We'll fill in our prediction at this stage, and we are seeing a The Green seat, of course, isn't included in that prediction because we haven't got any figures at all. But we're seeing 93 seats to 56 for the coalition. So that's not at the bottom end of some of the predictions that were going on. But there are still a lot of seats which are very close, and we'll be doing a lot of analysis of some of the seats in Western Sydney in the near future, particularly where there's a lot going on.
Now, Anthony, based on your history of prediction and the computer's history of prediction in the past, how confident are you? With reasonably close to this, how confident are you about how this is likely to match out against the reality?
I usually have a plus or minus figure on that. I've got a plus or minus 6 seats on that at the moment. So the coalition is somewhere between 87 and 99. Labor is somewhere between 50 and 62. So it's a pretty confident prediction.
So Stephen Smith, is that closer to 77 or 96?
It's closer to 96. If we end up...
That is 1996 when Paul Keating lost to John Howard. Yes, let us just make that very clear.
Depending upon the age of the person I'm speaking to, when I talk about 1996 or when I talk about 96 or 75/77, I've got to clarify that I'm talking about years, not number of seats. But you're old enough to understand.
I am, sadly.
But look, if we end up with a number of seats with a 5 in front of it, then I'll be pleased at the end of the night.
What a terrible admission.
Well, we ended up on that. After 96, we ended up with 50 odd seats, and then one short election later, we were back in the game. I've got a theory now about Australian elections, which is always honoured in the breach. I think the natural term of office in Australia, particularly now the states have moved to 4-year terms, is 2 elections, and after that, either the opposition has to be inadequate or there have got to be extraordinary circumstances for the government to get a 3rd term. Now, that's more often than not honoured in the breach, but the Liberal Party's political capital starts to go downhill from tonight. If you've got 50 seats, you've got a basis of a good shadow ministry, you've got the basis of being a viable act, and you can then march on for the future. I was worried when we first came in that we might be looking at a figure with a 4 in front of it.
Arthur Sinodinos, I don't know that you'll be too fussed to hear Stephen Smith saying it's all downhill from here. It could be a very long hill.
Yeah, it could be, and it could be getting close to 1996, and we'll take that. We're happy to take that.
You'll settle for 96.
But look, there's been a lot of focus on the House of Reps, and I would say this because I'm a senator, but I think to the challenge that Stephen is throwing out there about the political capital of a potential new government, the fact of the matter is, unless the new government gets close to balance in the Senate, I think the story of what's going on in Australia still has some way to go. We're not suddenly back to some era of quiet majority government. It's going to be quite a volatile time.
So what's your gut feeling about the Senate?
Look,
is it possible to have a gut feeling given the number of candidates scattered across the countryside?
Well, look, if our primary vote holds up in New South Wales, for example, we should be able to get 3 up, which would be great in my case. Among everything else.
Explain that Arthur Sinodinos is number 3 on the Liberal ticket.
Don't tell anyone, Arthur, but given the person who might knock you off, I'm actually in favour of that.
Yeah, thanks. But the Palmer Party have surprised me with their vote across the country in the reps, and I think that will translate into the Senate. And so, whereas we were looking at Katter, particularly in Queensland, as being the one who might benefit, I'm not sure now. But what I'm saying is, how are you
going to cut your cloth to make Claude Palmer happy?
Well, it'd be a fascinating Senate.
I'd actually rather deal with them and with, say, Nick Xenophon and Madigan than with the Greens, because the issue with the Greens is, and I think this has affected the current government, is that they foisted a lot of their agenda on the current government, and I think that has been to the detriment of the current government more so than anybody else, I reckon.
Okay, we're going to keep you in touch with the figures as they roll in, but as we've said, there is clearly a change of government. It's just by how much is the issue, but a lot is the general answer. I'm now going to cross back to Tony Jones with Tanya Plibersek and Concetta Fierravanti-Wells.
Yeah, and Connie, Anthony Green has called it. Are you now prepared to take the risk to say the coalition has won the election?
Well, it's certainly looking very promising, Tony, but I'll wait a little bit longer.
Tanya Plibersek?
Oh, look, I am a cautious person by nature, but I think that it's pretty clear. It's a matter of the size of the victory.
Yes, and in terms of individual seats, Lindsay, we've talked about as a bellwether in Western Sydney. David Bradbury, I think you now believe is gone, is that right?
Oh, look, Sadly, I do. I mean, I think
that's a campaign headquarters message.
A fantastic person, ran a great campaign, has made a wonderful contribution to the Parliament, but on the numbers as they look at the moment, I don't think there's any chance that he'll be elected.
I've just got some information from Lindsay that the booths are looking very, very good for us.
Or bad.
bad for you and good for us.
So are you now prepared to say how many seats you think you've already lost in New South Wales?
Look, I would say, I don't know about how many we've declared lost, but I would reckon that we will lose around 9 in New South Wales.
Can you take a quick run through the ones you think have gone?
Well, actually what I'd rather do is talk to you about some of the ones that might be surprises around the edges.
Okay, well, yes, we did talk about whether there be any bright lights at the end of the tunnel for Labor.
Well, I think Stephen mentioned Solomon, and I think that Solomon is an outside chance. Melbourne is the seat that I'm watching very closely as well. We were a bit worried how the Liberal Party preferences would flow between the Greens and Labor, and it looks like about 80% of Liberal preferences are coming to Labor, so I'm hopeful that we might win Melbourne back.
So Adam Bant, Deputy Leader of the Greens, would be gone in those circumstances?
In that case, yeah. Very slim outside chance, but one I'm watching closely as well is Gilmore, because you've got a retiring member there. Some of the ones that have come in as very unusual, potentially, Clive Palmer, a chance in Fairfax. Alex Sommerley, very popular sitting member there, is retiring as well. I mean, I would be surprised if that happened at the end of the day, but the early counting has him with a very strong show. And
can I just ask, Connie, are you getting this same message on Clive Palmer?
That would be very surprising because, I mean, Alex, it's been quite a while that we've known that Alex is going, so that's sort of been in place for quite some time. It might be just some early figures.
It could be early figures, could be small booths, but that would make things interesting. And Alex is just a delightful human being. I think his personal vote would have been a very strong one there.
Can I just bring us to Tasmania, because Anthony Green showed us the early state swings, and Tasmania was the biggest, 11.1%. What message are you getting from the party headquarters about the swing in Tasmania? Because a swing like that would take out most of your seats.
Yeah, look, the early figures I had was about a 10.5% swing against us in Tasmania. That obviously worries me terribly.
Well, that would take out Bass, Braddon, Franklin would be in danger, and Lyons, we've been hearing, could be in danger.
Quite often the early figures are small booths. The small booths would predominantly be country booths, so I think we'll do better in larger city booths, so I don't think it will end up being a 10.5% swing, but that is it's a large swing, and I think, the state government down there has been struggling as well. I think there's a bit of a washover between state and federal figures down there.
Yes, Connie, what do you think's happening in Tasmania?
Look, I think the Green-Labor alliance at the state level is going to affect definitely the vote there. It's about jobs, it's about economic growth down in Tasmania. Look, when you look at the 3 seats, I think that are very much Bass and Braddon are in play, and also Lyons. I mean, Andrew Nikolic has very good candidates, run an exceptional campaign, as has Brett Whiteley. But Eric Hutchinson in Lyons, he was the candidate last time, and let's not forget he took almost 4% off Dick Adams last time. So he's just continued to campaign in the intervening period. But certainly the message at the state level has been very, very helpful to them. I think we're really seeing in Tasmania the Green-Labor alliance working to the detriment of the Tasmanian people, and I think that that's washing through the federal perspective.
What you'd have to say about this is if this is indeed an indicator of what the result's like, it is a proof that if the swing's on, the swing's on, because I would say they're 3 of our best local members, Sid Sidebottom, Jeff Lyons and Dick Adams. Incredibly hard-working, very popular.
At a general point, the federal government would have to take away, or form a federal government, as we now must call it. Green-Labor alliances just don't seem to work for voters.
Well,
I'm going to have to leave you there. We'll come back to you on that, and we'll speak to you both later.
Okay, time to get an overview of what has happened tonight in election 2013, because we've now had 13.9% of the vote counted across the nation. Now, there'll be different stories told in different states, and we're going to go to those in just a moment. But as it stands, in two-party preferred terms, Labor, on that 13.9% counted, has recorded 45.3% of the vote. The Liberal National Coalition have recorded 54.7% of the vote, with 14% counted. Now, that represents a swing of 3.3% across the nation. As I say, in some states that swing will be bigger, in some it'll be smaller. We'll cross to Joe O'Brien now, who'll give you a breakdown of how some of those figures are working on the ground.
Thanks, Kerry. So all the indications were this was going to be a good night for the Coalition and a shocker for the Labor Party faithful, and that's how it's playing out right now. These are the seats we're allocating that we're confident of a result in right now. This isn't not all the seats in the Parliament, but we're saying Labor is definitely down 10 seats at the moment, including Lindsay, Deakin and Corangamite. The Coalition picking up 12 at 72, so only 3 or 4 seats to take government. The Greens still uncertain about that result for Adam Bant in Melbourne, and we're saying Andrew Wilkie is over the line in Denison. So let's take a look now at how the primary vote is looking. Labor sitting at 33.5, the Coalition at 44.8, the Greens at 9 and the others at 12.7. How does that compare to the 2010 result? We're going to see a significant fall here for Labor, down 4.4%. The Coalition only up 1.1% at this stage. The Greens at 2.7 and the other parties up pretty substantially at this stage at 6.1. So Clive Palmer might be one to watch out for there in the seat of Fairfax later, as Tanya Plibersek was just saying. So let's take a look now at how things will work on the floor of the House. So at the moment we're saying the Coalition has 72 seats, as I said. Only need three or four more seats to take government. On the other side of the House, it's a pretty sorry story for the Labor Party tonight. 42 seats at the moment, so a long night there for the Labor Party faithful. Let's take a look now at how the prediction is looking for the end of the night. We're saying the ALP will pick up 58 seats. The LNP 90, the Greens none at this stage. Obviously this isn't a final, but we're predicting this is what could be the result at the end of the night with 2 independents. So a result there not as bad as 96 for the Labor Party, Kerry, but looking that way.
Thanks, Joe, and it's worth noting at this point in the night, and we're now up to 15.5% of the vote counted, that the primary vote to Labor at this election so far is running at 33.5%. Now, if the end result is anything like that, that will be Labor's worst primary vote recorded since the 30s. Something for Labor to consider, I would have thought. Now, Anthony, can we take a look at how this national trend breaks down state by state, certainly down the eastern seaboard at least?
Well, we'll have a look at the 5 states which are currently reporting figures, if I can remember which graphic to bring up. Here we go, the state swings. In New South Wales at the moment, we're seeing a swing of 3.1% overall. In Victoria, we're seeing a swing of 5.5%. In Queensland, a swing of only 1.5%. So I've got quite a small swing in Queensland, which is not, slightly unexpected at this stage. I haven't delved into it close enough to find out why. But I'll add 2 other states here. South Australia, there's a swing of 4.5%, which is not enough to lose any seats if it continues at that rate. But Tasmania, 8.1%. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to my map and I'll have a look around Tasmania and just have a look at the individual seats that are going on in Tasmania. In Bass, we're seeing a swing of 10.3%, which would defeat Jeff Lyons and elect Paul Nikolic. In Braddon, the swing is 10.9%, which would defeat Sid Sidebottom and elect Brett Whiteley, and that's a pretty consistent swing at this stage. In Lyons, the swing's 14.9%. Wow. That's not quite being given away yet. We can hang on to that one a little bit longer for the Labor Party. The Labor Party won't be giving that one away yet. Franklin, 6.3% at this stage, and the Labor Party looks like they should be able to hold that one. And in Andrew Wilkie's seat, I'll just have a quick look at the percentage votes there. His first preference vote, turning to percentages, 40%, 24% for Tanya Denison. Now, the interesting thing there is the Labor Party's preferences flow to the Liberals. If those figures continue, that might be a seat we come back and look later in the evening, though I very much doubt that most Labor voters would necessarily have followed that ticket. But Wilkie, I think he gets the Green preferences. He should get over the line there. But the fact that Labor's fallen to third place there at the moment makes that a bit more interesting. Now, I've got one more thing to look at. If I can go back to my map and look across Western Sydney at this stage. Let's go in there. That's the way it was before the election. Let's colour in the predictions we've got at the moment. The only seats we're giving away at the moment is Lindsay, where David Bradbury's been defeated. The Liberals are ahead in Parramatta with Julie Owens, a 4.9% swing. They're ahead in... Well, they're holding... Wow! Here we go. Let's go back in. I am trying to get Reid here, which I think's that seat there. Reid, the swing's 3.4%, which is enough to defeat Labor there, but that seat's still in doubt. In Banks, now Barton first, 6.5%, Labor will retain that. But Banks next door, 2.4%, still in doubt. So what's happening there is a lot of talk of seats that were sweeping and falling, and they're not. And I'll have a look at Kingston Smith, because I haven't seen it for a while. The candy bar's there. Matt Thistlethwaite's ahead on the first preferences, and on the two-party preferred swing, we're seeing a swing at 2.5%. So clearly, some of the reported swings are not as big as expected. The national polls are right. But
Is it possible to throw McMahon in there, Anthony?
I'll have to go back to the map. We'll go there in a moment.
But that's all right.
The map?
I'm impressed.
Even if he does bounce back at me occasionally. Here we go, down here, McMahon.
This, of course, is Chris Bowen's seat. He's the Treasurer.
We've got 3.9% swing there. If I look at the percentage votes that are going on, 7702 to 6612. So Chris Bowen's ahead, and if I look at the match swing that's occurring there, 3.9%.
And he needs 8%.
So only gets half of it. So at this stage, it's not the wipeout in Western Sydney that was being predicted on these figures. Just one thing I would say, 11% informal in McMahon. There's huge numbers of candidates in some of these electorates.
No, but also there's high non-English speaking background. A lot of people not filling the thing. This has been happening for a while now. It's an issue, I think, the AEC and political parties to consider how best to get around this.
What we know is that the Senate ballot paper confuses voters into only using one number. And it particularly happens in New South Wales.
Increasing support for people who have English as a second language. That'll be a start.
My message from Chris Bowen was that there have been swings towards him in key big booths, so on Anthony's analysis and on my message from Chris, he'll hold his seat. It's a very good thing.
Okay, and we're going to actually cross now to the seat of Bass. This is, as we know, this is the seat that changes hands a great deal, and we know that has gone to the Liberal Party tonight. We're going to look at the figures first, Anthony.
Look at the figures, and we've got, let me see, we've got 39% counted. We have actual preferences in 18 of the 57 booths. Let's look at the numbers here. Andrew Nikolic is well ahead on first preferences, far ahead on first preferences. When we actually compare the booths, the information from, the swing is 9.6%, and at this stage on those numbers, we're calling Andrew Nikolic as the new member for Bass.
And we're welcoming Jeff Lyons now, coming to us from the seat of Bass. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. You are our first correspondent from the state of Tasmania tonight, where there seems to be an extraordinary swing against the ALP, around about 8% statewide. Anthony Green's just told us that the swing in your seat is around about 10%. Now, you've got a 6.7% margin. Ordinarily, you should be safe as houses. What's happening down there?
I'm not sure. All I know is I've worked as hard as I can, and if I guess the swing's on, the swing's on.
And why is it on in Tasmania more than it is elsewhere in Australia, in your view?
I haven't seen the actual figures yet. I'm not sure of the total amount of votes that have been counted, but it certainly appears there is a swing on. Which hasn't been revealed to us when we've been knocking on doors, etc.
Well, I think we were looking at about 37% of the vote counted in your seat, so it's significant numbers, Mr. Lyons. You haven't been aware of any sort of hostility on the ground that would give you a warning of a swing this considerable?
No, not really. It's been really interesting on the doors. Most people seem to still want to chat, and I haven't had many doors slammed in my face, so that's been really interesting. And we've always thought that it wasn't like the pollsters had tipped, but it seems that maybe the impression we've been getting on the doors isn't quite as accurate as we thought.
Jeff Lyons, there was a lot of commentary suggesting that because you have an unpopular Liberal Green government in Tasmania, that it would handicap federal Labor candidates. Is that your view? Does that come up very much?
Well, it does come up. Obviously, any government in coalition is difficult, and I don't know, what degree that means, but it certainly would have been better if Labor had been able to govern in its own right.
And I think this is a question that most candidates probably face this evening. You were a Gillard supporter who changed camps to Mr Rudd and backed him for the leadership 9 weeks ago. What difference has that made to the outcome in your seat, do you think?
Well, I haven't revealed how I voted in that election.
How presumptuous of me, am I wrong?
Oh, yeah, quite so, yes.
Can you tell me what difference the leadership change has made in your seat, in your view, though?
There is no doubt that we lifted when Kevin was first put into the position. We lifted considerably, I think, but that has waned over the time.
And what are the big issues that came up in your seat? I mean, when you were door knocking, what were people saying to you? What do you think the burning issues in your seat were?
Well, there are a few things. One, we've got to sort out freight, and the other one is jobs. That's been a very difficult issue. Some of the things that Labor have promised, the university exercise science establishment would have been one of those great things, I think, for the government. I hope that the Liberals start talking to the university and that gets up. It's very interesting. Basically, it's been jobs and some of the industries that have declined, and I'm looking forward to if the Liberals, it looks like they're in government, I hope that they can get some industry back into Tasmania, sort out our freight problems, because they are the issues that need to be fixed.
Where does your electorate stand now on the issue of carbon pricing more broadly, Mr Lyons?
Well, it looks pretty evident that the Liberals are in, and I'm absolutely certain that Tasmanians are aware that there is a climate change issue, and it has been affected by human intervention, and I just hope that into the future there is some action taken to try and reduce our emissions.
Well, look, thank you very much for joining us tonight from Tasmania, Member for Bass, Mr Lyons. Thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers, have a good night.
Now, we've got seats in play all over the country as we speak, and we're going to get through them as quickly as we can. For instance, in Queensland, we hear that the statewide swing to the coalition is around 1.2%. That was expected to be a higher swing, but let's just see how it's playing out in individual seats. And we're going to start with perhaps one of the most interesting seats in the country tonight. That's the seat of Griffith, in the inner southern suburbs of Brisbane, held by the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. We all know the story of the ups and downs of Kevin Rudd and the ups and downs of Labor. But he was on a margin going into this campaign of 8.5%. He's held the seat since 98. We've now had 18.5% of the vote counted, and there's been a 3.1% swing.
And at this stage, he's slightly behind on first preferences, but with nearly 10% off there with the Greens, and their preferences will favour him during the distributions. And when we factor in the preferences in the polling places, the swing is currently 3.3%. So it's not big enough to defeat Kevin Rudd. So at this stage, so I've got 8 out of 50 polling places, and the swing is 3%. It would be unusual for that to leap up to 8 from there. So I suspect it looks like Kevin Rudd.
So Kevin Rudd is back in the Parliament in some form. Now, the seat of Lily, we've talked a little bit about, the seat of Brisbane. This is Teresa Gambaro won this seat for the coalition in 2010, but on a very slender margin of 1.1%. We've now got 34.5% of the vote counted there.
And this is a comfortable victory for Teresa Gambaro. We've got 24 of the 46 boos on first preferences, 12 on two candidate preferred. The Greens there on 14%. Preferences will favour Labor, but Teresa Gambaro's got a 4.5% swing to her and will retain that seat.
The exit polls or the
feedback we were getting was the economy was a very strong issue in that inner city seat, which I found quite interesting, that it wasn't the usual diverse set of other issues like same-sex marriage had come up, a couple of other things, but it's quite interesting that the economy seems to have been the main issue they voted on. Quite odd.
Right. And now the seat of Lilly. This is Wayne Swan's seat, held it since 98. He needs a swing of 3.2, or the Liberals need a swing of 3.2% against him to unseat Wayne Swan, and with 34.5% of the vote counted, the swing to the coalition is 2.1%.
And 2.1%, and as you can see there, the first preferences, Wayne Swan 42, Rod McGarvey 37.8. Wayne Swan will be very pleased to be ahead on first preferences there, but there are some booths there which aren't good Labor booths, and so the swing is actually 2.1% to the Liberal Party, not enough to defeat Wayne Swan at this stage. Now, as I'm running through some of these figures, I'm starting to get that feeling that what is happening with the pre-poll votes and how the pre-poll votes might affect some of these swings. So these seats which are ending up just on the Labor side of the pendulum, will those pre-poll votes matter later in the evening? But having said that, we'll move on to the next electorate.
Okay, which is the electorate of Ford in outer southern Brisbane, held by Vert van Manen. He won this seat at the last election for the coalition, and he's sitting on a margin of 1.6%. With 24% of the vote counted.
Yeah, and this is, of course, Peter Beattie is the Labor candidate in this seat. This was the star candidate brought in at the start of the campaign. It's well behind there on first preferences. When we factor in, we've got 9 preference count booths in at this stage. It's showing a tiny swing to the Labor Party, that's all, which won't be enough to defeat Bert van Manen. So Bert van Manen's ahead, but we're not giving it away at this stage. But that's certainly not... That's nothing like some of those automated polls that reported in the campaign. They reported nothing like that.
What's pretty clear, I think, Kerry, is in terms of the heavy hitters from Queensland, Kevin and Wayne re-elected, they'll hold their seats, and Peter doesn't make it into the federal parliament.
Okay, now the seat of Petrie, another seat, northern suburbs of Brisbane, held by Yvette D'Ath for the Labor Party since 2007. With a margin of 2.5%, and we've now had 36% of the vote counted there, Anthony.
And at this stage, Yvette D'Ath is ahead. She's behind there on the first preferences, but only 2% behind. This isn't an electorate with a huge amount of diversity between the polling places. We're estimating the swing is 1.2%, only half of what's needed. And at this stage, we're saying Yvette D'Ath is ahead. We haven't given the seat away at this stage, but again, we're not seeing the sort of massive thing. I'll just say briefly that the talk was the huge swings in New South Wales and Queensland, and not much in New South Wales. Victoria, well, the big swing at the moment is in Victoria, which we'll come to in a while, but we'll get through the rest of these Queensland seats first. Okay,
now the seat of Fairfax on the northern Sunshine Coast, this was the seat that Clive Palmer was contesting, and Alex Sommier was retiring, having held the seat since 1990. On paper, the Liberal National Party has held this with a margin of 7%. We've now had 40% of the vote counted.
Yes, and I'll run through this graphic, and I'll say before we get there that the last page is wrong, and I'll explain why. Clive Palmer's on 29%, the Liberals on 38.5%, Labor's on 18%, the Greens on 8%. All the preferences favour Palmer in this seat. Wow. And on those numbers, what we're getting from the Electoral Commission is a Labor versus the LNP count as the preference count, and that turns into a comfortable victory for the LNP. I will now go into the computer and I'll turn off the receipts of the preference count from the Electoral Commission, because in my view that's going to be a contest between the LNP and Clive Palmer, and at this stage that's a very close contest. So Ted O'Brien, I wouldn't pay attention to that prediction.
But you're saying that potentially Clive Palmer is in the race?
Clive Palmer is 9% behind, and there's 26% with the Greens and Labor Party who are directing preferences to him. Yeah. Now, there's a lot more counting to come. We will not know the result in that electorate tonight because the Electoral Commission is not counting preferences that way.
You mean it's even beyond your computer, Anthony?
Oh, we will make an estimate, but I'm just saying is that the people shouldn't take that prediction as gospel because it was the wrong parties.
Anthony, there are also 30,000 pre-polls in that seat.
Well, all right, well, it's certainly not one.
We certainly won't know it tonight.
If there's 30,000 pre-polls, then I'd be even less likely to call it.
Yeah, about a third, of the electorate, yeah.
Okay, now we're going to look at the seat of Fisher. This is another interesting seat up around the Sunshine Coast. Oh. This was held by Peter Slipper.
Slippery one.
We know something of the story of Peter Slipper and what happened to his career. And he's contested it as an independent going into this election. On paper, a coalition margin of 4.1%, And this seat, of course, is also being contested by the former senior Liberal Minister, Mal Brough. Anthony.
And Mal Brough's well ahead on 42.9% of the vote. The Labor Party's second on 21%, and Bill Schock is on 18.9%. The person you can't see there is Peter Slipper, the current member. He's polling 1.4%. So on the numbers we're seeing at this stage, I would expect that Mal Brough would win that election. The only concern for the Liberal Party is if Palmer's United Party pulled ahead of the Labor candidate in that seat again, in which case it would go to preferences. But I still think Mal Brough would win, even if the preference count was different. But the one thing to say is Peter Slipper got 1.4% of the vote.
That's
and
even
we're
less.
Joined now from Fisher by the man who appears to be the new member for Fisher, Mal Brough. It's been a lot of water under the bridge, I'd say, since you were last doing one of these election night crosses, but it looks like welcome back.
Yeah, normally behind the mic, Annabelle, but look, tonight is far from over. What you just described there in Fairfax will be repeated here in Fisher, I believe. My latest figures have myself on about 44% of the primary vote, and it's going to be a toss-up between whether Palmer Party candidate or the Labor candidate scrapes into second place. And if that's reversed, I think you'll find that this will throw it on its head. I really think tonight I've got to get to 47%. There's a lot of pre-polls, and that will be crucial. So this is far from out of the woods yet, Annabelle, and I'm not counting any chickens before I hatch.
Okay, so polls during the campaign put the support for other parties at up to 17%. What is the draw of these rival parties in Queensland in particular?
Yeah, we saw a real collapse in the Labor vote up here today. We actually started to see it 3 days ago on the pre-polls, and it was consistent from all of our booth workers, and that vote seemed to be going straight to the Palmer Party. So in certain parts of the electorate today, that flowed through, but not uniformly. It was quite interesting. So it really is a booth-by-booth affair. But typically, on a booth that might have had 2,500 people last election, has had 1,700, and the remainder have pre-polled. So we've got to see how we go with those.
Is Queensland just sick of both major parties, do you think?
Clive Palmer threw a hell of a lot of money at this. Page 2 and 3 of our daily paper every day this week. It was just saturation. So he had a message, a populist message, one of money for everyone and no accountability. And, that's obviously won some support. It would seem people that felt they couldn't come to the coalition could protest with Mr Palmer. So, look, this has got a long way to run, and we're just going to have a bit of a long night here.
What would a Clive Palmer member for Fairfax situation mean for you, do you think? And for the entire nation?
I hear you chuckle. Well, may you chuckle. I don't know. Let's look. I just don't know. This is uncharted territory.
Well, let's get back to your electorate, Mal Brough. It must be a very confused electorate by this stage. A lot has happened to the poor people of Fisher over the last few years. What's their mood? Shocked? Troubled?
Well, no, very interesting. Don't say shocked, because that's the name of the pop candidate. I think what we had here was, a really good mood on the booths. And it's been reflected in that with a very strong campaign run through the media by Palmer, and with 10 candidates in the field, we will poll the same as last time with our primary vote, or maybe a slightly higher. So I think that's commendable, but it doesn't really matter unless we can get those preferences. And quite frankly, at this stage, I don't know where they're going to fall.
Well, a tentative welcome back, Mal Brough, but on your advice, we will continue to keep a keen eye on your seat. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Annabelle. Good to be with you.
And we're going to continue our run of seats, and we're going to take a particular look at Victoria, where there's considerable interest. It would seem that there's a bigger swing on in Victoria that wasn't expected, as there is smaller swings in some other parts of the national electorate. We'll start with the seat of Bendigo. This is central Victoria. Steve Gibbons is the retiring Labor member, having held the seat since 1998. And he went into this election, or his party went into the election, with a margin of 9.4%. We've now had 36% of the vote counted.
And we've got quite a swing on here. Steve Gibbons, Lisa Lisa Chesters is behind on the first preferences, but quite a low first preference. There's 13 candidates in this electorate, which is much, certainly a lot more than we've had in the past. We're seeing a swing of 7.3% at this stage, which is not enough to defeat the Labor candidate there. And so on the numbers we've got the Labor Party ahead. We haven't definitely given it away at this stage, but with 14 out of 71 booths, the swing in that electorate isn't yet big enough to defeat Labor in Bendigo.
Okay, the seat of Deakin. This is in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Mike Simon won this seat for Labor in 2007. He's on a knife-edge margin of 0.6%, and we've now had 20.7% of the vote counted.
And we'll go through the numbers here, and you can see from the first preferences that Labor is miles behind, 45.7 for Michael Sukkar, the Liberal candidate up against Mike Simon. Mike Simon's the only Labor member ever re-elected in that seat. He's held it for 2 terms. It's a slice of middle-class eastern Melbourne. It's a more natural Liberal electorate and only won by Labor at strong victories like the last 2 federal elections. So there's been a 5% swing, and Michael Sukkar is the new member for Deakin, the new Liberal member for Deakin.
Okay, Chisholm, also in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. This is a seat held by the Speaker of the Parliament, Anna Burke, for Labor since 1998, on a margin of 5.8% with 22.3% of the vote counted.
And we've got there Anna Burke, the Speaker. John Nguyen, 43.1%. It's the second time he's run here for the Liberal Party up against Anna Burke. We've got 10% there with the Greens. Those preferences will favour Labor. We have preference counts in 9 of the 45 booths, so it's about 1 in 5 of the booths. And at this stage, it's showing a swing of 3.3%. We're saying an ALP retain at this stage, and I think it's generally accepted that Anna Burke, who took over a very marginal seat more than a decade ago, has actually been an effective local member. Has got a significant personal vote in that area, and it seems to be holding her in good stead, considering the swings in some other electorates.
Okay, now the seat of McEwen, we talked about it earlier, Central Victoria. Rob Mitchell won this seat for Labor in 2010. On paper, you'd say 9.2% would be a safe margin for Labor, but with 20.4% of the vote counted, not necessarily the case.
In my 2 decades of covering elections, the one thing I've always learnt is you wait for the electorates that run across the top end of Melbourne. You wait till the last booths. Melbourne is sort of growing north of Marnie's Road bit by bit, and there's big booths in places like Craigieburn and those sorts of areas, and they come in last in all of these electorates. So McEwen includes mainly Sunbury, but they come in quite late, and you get these funny swings. At the moment, that's the numbers, and Labor is miles behind. And when we factor in the swing, it's showing a 9.5% swing in the Liberal Party ahead. We'll be waiting all night for that, and that is one of the seats where all those pre-polls will matter. But as I said, McEwen, I've done that many times in the state seat of, it's not Jaga, it's Yarra or something rather, but the one across the north of Yan Yean, they always have this issue that the biggest growing booths are on the very bottom edge and they come in last, and you sometimes get that effect in the swing.
Okay, another particularly interesting seat tonight is the seat of Indi in northeast Victoria. Sophie Mirabella has been the Liberal member since 2001, and again on paper you'd say 9% would be a pretty safe margin, but with with 28% of the vote counted, that's going to be a tight contest tonight.
Yeah, now I've switched my system over to using preference estimates at this stage. Sophie Mirabella's on 44.7, Kath McGowan's on 33, Robin Walsh on 10.8. At the moment, when I go on to do my preference estimates, there's no polling place analysis in this. This is just straight numbers on my estimates of preferences. I'm estimating 70% of Labor preferences and Green preferences to McGowan, and it's turning into a very close contest. There's no decision there. No, I don't think Sophie Mirabella has been re-elected. I'll say that now. It's closer than that. I thought I'd turn polling place matching off on that election, but I'll have a look at it again. That is not being called at this stage. I think Sophie Mirabella's vote will fall. My estimate is I think she might end up with about 41% first preference vote. Then that puts her at risk. So that's not a call for Sophie Mirabella. It's too close to call.
I think your estimate of ALP preferences to the independent is an underestimation. I don't think I would meet a Labor voter in that seat who would want to cast a preference for the sitting member, so that you could get that as high as 80 or 90.
I'm a cautious man. I prefer to underestimate than overestimate. So.
I'm very pleased to hear that, Anthony. Now, the seat
I think she's in trouble.
Yeah, she's in trouble.
The seat of Melbourne is another very interesting seat, because this has been a long-standing seat for Labor until the last election when Adam Bant won it for the Greens. The Greens went into this campaign with a margin, a safety margin of 5.9%. Now, we've only had 10.8% of the vote counted. I'm not quite sure why, but what's the story, Anthony?
The reason why is there's 16 candidates, basically. It takes a long time to count a contest with that many candidates, and to a large extent that's what's delayed the count. That's what we're seeing at the moment. Adam Bandt's on 45.2%, which is a good result for him on first figures, and he will be, let me look at the change in vote that's occurring. Labor vote's down 13%, the Green vote up 9.6%. So that's, I think that's actually comparing first preference votes by polling place. So that's a very good first figure for him. We're estimating that after preferences, the swing is only 3%. At this stage, we've got it as a Green retain. I'd personally like to wait a little bit longer. I can see the fans are all very keen on that. But at this stage, that's a good first figure for Adam Bandt.
And he joins us now from the seat of Melbourne. Adam, I hope you can hear me. It looks like your supporters have just heard Anthony, despite being cautious, making what sounds like an encouraging pronouncement about your seat. Can I give you a tentative congratulations?
Thanks very much. It's actually hard to hear what you've been...
Yes, I can...
behind me getting some news.
Now, you obviously have a lot of influence with your people at this stage. Perhaps you could ask them to, oh, well done. Yes, excellent. How obedient you are. Now, Adam Bandt, just take us through what you think were the decisive issues in your seat during this campaign.
Well, we made it very clear in this campaign that elections shouldn't be a race to the bottom and a competition about who is able to beat up the most on refugees. Elections should be about offering visions for this country and how we are going to make this country better in the 21st century, and it seems that people have responded.
You've spent the last 3 years with a collection of crossbenchers and a very unusual arrangement in the House of Representatives. It looks tonight as though the result's going to be quite a bit more decisive than it was 3 years ago, but it looks like you might still have some friends on the crossbenchers. Early figures look like Clive Palmer still a chance in Fairfax, so that's somebody to have lunch with in the cafeteria.
Well, I'm sure we'll get on fine. The last time I got elected, the first thing they did was sit me next to Bob Katter at the National Press Club. He got a steak and I got a bread roll, so I don't know what Clive Palmer's going to get.
Well, it sounds like he'll be back as well as Andrew Wilkie. Tell me, I know that this is largely a question for the Senate and it's not your chamber, but what do you make of the strong showing of these minor party candidates so far tonight?
Well, one of the pieces of feedback that I got throughout the whole election was that people are fed up with Labor in particular deciding to out-Abbott Tony Abbott. I mean, that's a losing game because there's nothing that guy won't do. And in the midst of all of that, we went to the election with a positive platform for a clean economy and a caring society, and I think people want that kind of positive vision back in Australian politics, and perhaps that's what they're voting for around the country as well.
So just over 3 years ago, Julia Gillard staged a press conference in the Prime Ministerial Courtyard with Bob Brown to announce the agreement on carbon pricing. It looked like a happy marriage at that point, and now you and the Labor Party just can't get away from each other fast enough.
Well, and if these results that I haven't seen yet, but the people behind me have, if it turns out that that's representative of what's happening across the seat of Melbourne, it shows that people actually want more of that kind of action and want faster action on global warming because they know that is one of the biggest threats that this planet is facing. And while in the rest of the country you might have Tony Abbott running a scare campaign, here in Melbourne people know that we've got to take some action in this country.
Do you think that the seat of Melbourne was influenced, or you've got a high student population there? Was the issue of the cuts made to tertiary education to finance the Gonski deal relevant?
It was a big issue and it was something that we campaigned on strongly. The idea that in Australia now you would slash university funding and put students into even more debt, when the only way that we will succeed in the 21st century is by investing more in education and taking the pressure off our students. It didn't go down very well here in Melbourne, and it seems these results are sending a pretty clear message about that too.
Adam Bandt, you're the Deputy Leader of the Greens. You've got the balance of power in the Senate for a bit longer now. What's your approach going to be to Tony Abbott's mandate, which you'd have to say, if figures go the way they look like they're going, is going to be substantial this evening?
Well, look, if these results hold up and I'm returned here in this seat, which we'll know after a bit more of the vote is counted, then I can tell you this: the real opposition in the House of Representatives to Tony Abbott's brutal agenda will be led by the people of Melbourne.
Okay, but the decisions will probably be made in the Senate, won't they, particularly on carbon pricing? Tony Abbott's been pretty clear about his intentions vis-a-vis your and Labor's carbon pricing regime. It's a hard thing to deny that mandate, isn't it?
Well, we've gone to the election with a very clear policy, which is that Australia needs to take more action to shift to renewable energy and to tackle climate change even faster than we've done so far. And we've been crystal clear from day one that what we will do is stand up to Tony Abbott's brutal agenda, and we are going to stick with that. One of the things about the Greens is that we stand up for the things that we believe in, and that's perhaps part of the reason that people have responded to us in the way they have.
Well, Adam Bandt, thank you for joining us tonight, and all your nodding friends. I hope you have a lovely evening. Good night.
Thanks very much.
And we go, a bit more cheering there from the seat of Melbourne, which wasn't unexpected. We're going to cross now to Tony Jones for some more analysis with Mitch Fifield from the Coalition and Tanya Plibersek.
And of course, Mitch is a Victorian, and we've just heard about all the Victorian seats in play, but we'll come to you in a minute on that. I actually just go big picture with Tanya for a while, because we heard Peter Beattie earlier saying the overriding thing that's happened here, the overriding reason for Labor losing this election is because of the leadership divisions over the last 6 years. That is, getting rid of a Prime Minister, then getting rid of another one and bringing back the old one. What do you say?
Look, I'm really proud of what we achieved in the government. I'm really proud of what we achieved in our last term, more than 500 pieces of legislation through the Parliament. But I think you have to acknowledge that the division that we've seen has been disastrous. I think I would give us 9 out of 10 for governing the country. I'd give us 0 out of 10 for governing ourselves. And I think it's pretty plain that we had too many people playing their own games and not playing for the team.
Playing their own games suggests you're talking about the Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, or let's say the previous Prime Minister, currently Labor leader Kevin Rudd. I mean, the suggestion is that he was playing his own game for 3 years after losing.
I'm not pointing fingers at anyone.
Leadership.
Yeah, no, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I don't think recrimination in public or in private will help us rebuild the Labor Party at all. And I think it's very important that we remain in the game, because, look, I've lost a lot of good colleagues tonight, I think, but I don't feel sorry for myself. I don't feel sorry for them. I'm concerned about what happens to Australia now, and for us to have a strong country and a viable democracy, for us to continue to deliver for the people who rely on us, for better healthcare, better education, a strong economy, we need to be back in the game quickly.
Well, I've got to ask you the obvious question. Was it worth it, in retrospect, the pain of dumping Australia's first female Prime Minister for the illusion that Kevin Rudd might in fact win you the election or put you in a stronger position?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to go over that stuff. It's
pretty important stuff. I mean, you'll all be talking about it behind the scenes, behind closed doors. Why not talk about it to the public on this of all nights?
Well, I think that the clear takeout from this defeat is that disunity is death, that we were not disciplined enough, and that, I think we would have won the 2007 election with Kim Beazley. I think that when we go into an election campaign, we need to be focused on every member of Parliament, every member of the House of Reps, every senator, every candidate, and every party member pulling together, because we've got something that we need to deliver for the people who rely on us.
I'm just going to press you one more time on that before I hear from Mitch on this. But if Labor wins just over 50 seats, and some argue you may have lost more seats with Julia Gillard, does that make it worthwhile, all that pain, all that division, and what it means for the Labor Party in the perception out there?
Well, I don't think that the division or the pain was justified at any stage, is what I'm saying. I think that we needed all the way through from before the 2007 election to be focused as a team on articulating our vision. And what we've learnt from tonight, what I hope every Member of Parliament, every Senator, every party official, every Labor Party member, is that we don't tolerate division, that we pull together as a team and we work together, because I'm concerned about my colleagues who've lost tonight. I'm sad that they've lost. It's terrible for them as individuals. I am so much more concerned about the people who are going to miss out in a country that's led by Tony Abbott as Prime Minister. I am so focused on what they're going to miss in education, in healthcare, and economically as well.
I'm going to Mitch Fifield on this. Well, looking at it from your point of view, the victor looking at the vanquished, what's your perspective?
Well, there's no doubt that things started to unravel for Labor when they took Kevin Rudd down in the first place. It's very different, a change of leadership in government as opposed to opposition. The Australian public have a sense of ownership of a Prime Minister. They feel they've put a Prime Minister there. They don't have that same sense of ownership with opposition leaders. They know that that's a position which has been appointed by the party. So Labor were extremely cavalier with their attitude when they removed Kevin Rudd, and there was no way for them to fix that. To go back to Kevin Rudd in the fullness of time, which they've done, was an admission that they'd made a mistake. To leave Julia Gillard there, the Labor Party knew what the result would be, a catastrophic electoral rout. So it was very hard for Labor to come back from that position in the first place of removing Kevin Rudd. I appreciate that Tanya, on a night like this, is playing very much the team game, but the blood will start to flow come 9 o'clock tomorrow when members of the Labor caucus, those who survive, start to say what they really think. And you can't say that we're a good government apart from the fact that we were completely introspective and self-absorbed for the last 4 years. You can't say that because you can't con the people. They know when you're focused on yourselves. You can't say, look, nothing to see here, move on. The public get it. And the government's administration of policy after policy, their maladministration, was evidence of the fact that they weren't focused on the core business of government.
We'll get Tanya to sector respond to that. We'll have to leave it there after that.
No, I just have to say, this is the thing that frustrates me. We have a great record. We've got 3 AAA credit ratings, almost 1 million jobs created, strong economy, low debt, low interest rates, low unemployment by international standards, strong social agenda, disability care, education, fantastic achievements. What is so devastating to me is that the distraction that we ourselves created from that record of achievement.
And just before you go, because this is the last time we're going to cross to you this evening, do you think Kevin Rudd should stand down from the leadership after this rout?
Oh, look, these are all matters for next week or the week after or some other time.
Thanks. We'll come back and talk about Victoria next time we speak to you, Mitch.